So, all these changes raise questions about, how do we make sure that HR capabilities are aligned with these kind of adjustments or modifications to the HR operating model, going forward. In early May, Beth and I conducted a working group that examined how companies are thinking about HR capabilities. And during this session, we really focused on two main questions. The first being, what are some of the new or perhaps just amplified HR capabilities that leaders need going forward? And second, what strategies are organizations adopting or thinking about as they look to develop these capabilities? So to frame this discussion, we positioned it within the CAHRS HR competency model that we developed and launched in 2018. This was developed in conjunction with our CAHRS advisory board. This particular effort was co-chaired by Kevin Cox, who is currently the CHRO at General Electric. And our goal with this effort was really to kind of look, a little bit towards the future, 5 years or so out, to think about, given changes that we're seeing in the function, what are some of the key capabilities that are going to be required for leaders in key positions? One of those being senior HRBPs, and as you'll see on the next slide, COE leaders. And here you see listed some of the key roles and responsibilities, as well as the traits and personal attributes, as well as competencies and capabilities necessary to really carry out those roles effectively. On the next slide, you see similar model for COE lead. Again, key roles and responsibilities around things like thought leadership and innovation, expert analysis, global process ownership, and again, some of the attributes and competencies needed to perform those. So what we really wanted to kind of examine in this working group was, have the changes that we've seen really kind of modified those competencies or capabilities that we'll need to focus on going forward. And I would say the overarching answer was, I don't think enough has changed in the last year to really kind of dramatically change the capabilities that we identified in that earlier effort, but it has highlighted certain capabilities that will probably become even more important in the upcoming years. And I've highlighted a few of those here. One is certainly change management, given the heightened need for ongoing support of transformation efforts within organizations. So we heard, HRBPs talking about the need for them to support their people leaders in their change efforts while also providing coaching and advisory, as well as the need for COEs to move from just kind of developing products and services to also really driving the implementation of those products within the business. At the same time, I think given all the change that we're seeing and change really becoming the new norm, there was a discussion around change management alone probably isn't enough. We also need to focus increasingly on organizational agility. So really thinking about HR leaders' role in building that capacity within their organizations, not only to support ongoing transformation, but also to support the increasing array of different kind of work models and arrangements that we're seeing, whether those are gig work or contract work or fast action project teams, really providing that muscle that organizations can flex as they look to diversify their different work models post-pandemic. The third one, data analytics, is surely one that's gotten a lot of attention in recent years. So it's been on the radar, but what we've heard through these working groups is that it will become and is becoming even more critical going forward, in part because of the need to leverage data analytics to navigate through a lot of the ambiguity and uncertainty that companies are wrestling with, particularly as it relates to talent decisions around recruiting and development and succession. We need to make sure that we're making evidence-based decisions. And the last one here, a little bit broader, but the idea being that we're seeing an increasing need for HR to engage in collaboration and partnering. What we heard repeatedly across these working groups is that HR has a lot on its plate. That's certainly always been the case, but even more so throughout the pandemic, when HR has really been at the front and center of all these efforts to navigate through disruption. And given that, HR is increasingly having to kind of look to others to partner and to take on some of these responsibilities. So we heard individuals in the working group, for example, talking about trying to upskill their people leaders in certain kind of fundamental HR practices like organization design so that they can do some of that on their own more independently, or making sure that they're partnering more across different parts of the kind of HR operating model to make sure that we're driving maximum impact and efficiencies, as well as achieving that kind of one HR that Beth alluded to earlier. Certainly, there were some other capabilities that emerged in the discussion, things like supporting people technology integration, digital transformation, global mindset, project management skills, organizational design, et cetera. But these were really the four key ones that emerged through the discussion. I found a really interesting part of this working group actually to be the kind of ensuing discussion around how are companies thinking about developing these capabilities. And much of that discussion really revolved around concerns that people have around the current state of HR development, which is being done by necessity almost exclusively online. There was some concerns, as you might expect, about just simply online fatigue, given the amount of time that people are spending online, on Zoom meetings and webinars, people attending yet another online development session. Were they really able to kind of maximize and extract maximum value from those learning experiences? Related to that, there was also concerns about the sustainability of some of these efforts. As I just talked about, we know that HR is being pulled in many different directions. There's concerns about just simply the bandwidth to engage in development. And we saw companies experimenting with a lot of different approaches to try to encourage participation, whether that was leader testimonials, experimenting with more innovative delivery mechanisms, things like gamification, as well as incentives. And some of those have had some success, but even so, there were concerns about over the long term, are we really going to be able to sustain some of these development efforts? And given this, what we're seeing a lot of companies try to do is supplement some of that self-directed online learning with more social learning, peer-to-peer learning, as well as mentoring, really to make sure that people are getting the most out of those learning experiences. Ultimately, I think there's widespread agreement that once we move beyond the pandemic and face-to-face learning becomes an option again, that we're really going to have to look at this model very closely. It's appealing in the sense that it's efficient, we can scale it globally, other things, but there are concerns about whether the online model alone is really going to lead to the types of outcomes that we're striving for.